Communications Commission voted Thursday to begin the process of proposing new rules that, if approved, would affect the way information moves over the Internet. On the Communicators this week, you'll hear perspectives from the FCC and members of Congress. From Thursday's meeting, here's Chairman Julius Genachowski and the senior Republican Commissioner, Robert McDowell.
Today's notice focuses on the Internet, the most significant technological breakthrough of our time. What started as an arcane lab experiment has developed into an unparalleled platform for innovation and investment, an engine for job creation and economic growth, and a vibrant forum for civic engagement. This development is due in large part to a single element of the Internet's design, its openness. The Internet is and has been an open platform, and it is that openness and the extraordinary benefits it has brought our country that we seek to preserve through the proceeding we launched today. The Internet's openness has allowed entrepreneurs and innovators, small and large, to create countless applications and services without having to seek permission from anyone. As a result, Internet pioneers with little more than a good idea and a no-frills Internet connection have built hundreds and thousands of small businesses, as well as web giants. More and more Americans depend on the Internet every day, at home, at work, in school, at our desks, and on the move. The Internet connects us to our family and friends, to the universe of knowledge, and to the working of our nation's democracy. The Internet has provided enormous benefits to consumers in the form of new and previously unimaginable services, competition, and choice. We wouldn't have these services without a strong network infrastructure and the billions of dollars of private capital invested to build it. And ever-growing consumer demand is driving billions of dollars of additional investment to increase broadband capacity and improve the intelligence of the networks. And so we have a virtuous cycle of investment, innovation, jobs, and consumer benefits. According to one study, the Internet supports more than 3 million American jobs. A core goal of the FCC's efforts is to preserve and promote this virtuous cycle driven by a free and open Internet. That's how we'll ensure that the Internet becomes an enduring engine for opportunity and prosperity for all Americans.
And today we do disagree on some substance. I do not share the majority's view that the Internet is showing breaks and cracks, nor do I believe that the government is the best tool to fix it. I also disagree with the premise that the Commission has the legal authority to regulate Internet network management as proposed today. Nonetheless, it is important for everyone to remember that today the Commission is starting a process, not ending one. The window of opportunity for dialogue is just beginning to open. Furthermore, today's action provides ample opportunity for the public to comment on a wide universe of issues. In that vein, I thank the Chairman for including in today's notice of proposed rulemaking the text of proposed rules for public comment. For too long, the Commission has fallen into the habit of obscuring from public view the text of proposed rules. I'm delighted that the Chairman has taken this step toward better transparency. The Chairman should also be complimented on providing a long and thorough comment period, during which I hope a deep and substantial record based on the facts, the law, and the public interest will emerge to illuminate a path to a sensible resolution of these important issues. I look forward to working with Julie Knapp and the tech advisory effort as well, and I think that's a great stroke, a great move. All of us can agree that the Internet is a tool that should maximize freedom. Consumers should be able to enjoy the fruits of Internet freedom, and the Internet itself should operate under freedom. America's policies and the policies of all governments should seek to strengthen such freedoms. We all agree that an open Internet should be preserved. Accordingly, in today's spirit of collegiality, those who disagree with the substance of today's notice, which carries with it the caption "Preserving the Open Internet," should not be presumed opposed to an open Internet. With freedom in mind, the Internet is perhaps the greatest deregulatory success story of all time. It became successful not by government fiat, but by all interested parties working together toward a common goal.
That was Chairman Genachowski and Senior Republican Commissioner Robert McDowell. Next, we spoke with the chairman of the House Communications, Technology, and the Internet Subcommittee, Virginia Democrat Rick Boucher about the FCC's vote to begin reviewing network neutrality regulations.
Congressman Rick Boucher, what did you make of today's FCC meeting?
I think it's commendable that Chairman Genachowski and the Commission have decided to move forward in taking steps to maintain the openness of the Internet. The Internet has been the most transformative platform for economic growth in our nation's history, and its open character is the reason that it has been so successful. Anything that threatens that openness threatens the long-term future of the U.S. economy, particularly now at a time when more applications are moving to the IP platform and being delivered over the Internet. And so it's critically important that at the federal government level, we take steps to make sure that that openness is retained. At the same time, and the order adopted by the Commission today acknowledges these needs, it is important that we understand that broadband providers have to manage the network. They have to keep the network functioning in such a way that people are getting the bandwidth to which they are subscribed, and that viruses and spam and other intrusions that are malicious in nature or highly inconvenient and can clog the operation of the Internet be eliminated. So a certain amount of network management is essential for that. Also, broadband providers should be able to engage in creating their own content and delivering that content across the last mile to their customers. And what I have in mind are some of the obvious applications like IP television. Verizon, for example, has initiated a FiOS service, fiber to the premises, over which they're carrying their own multi-channel television programs. And AT&T has done the same kind of thing using a somewhat different platform, but also offering, using the IP format, a series of television programs competing with the cable industry. Mm-hmm. And the broadband providers ought to be able to originate and manage and deliver that content in a way that is proprietary so that it reaches the customers who subscribe to it. And they ought to be able to offer other kinds of managed services that also would be proprietary in nature. The trick to this, and perhaps the hard part in the Commission's proceeding, is going to be determining in those instances where the managed services like IP television or other proprietary content originated by the broadband providers traverses the same infrastructure over that last mile, over which the public Internet access piece is also carried, dividing the line, drawing the boundaries between the managed services on the one hand and the public Internet piece on the other, so as to make sure that the managed services don't crowd out the public Internet piece. If that were to happen, then the openness and accessibility of the Internet to which I previously referred would in fact be placed at risk, and it would not nearly be as usable a platform going forward as it is today.
So in the input that the Commission wants to seek on this issue, in your opinion, who should they be talking to over these next days as they're building information and for possible rules?
Well, I think the Commission needs to consult a broad range of interested parties, obviously the broadband providers, but also companies that depend upon the Internet to deliver their product, content originators like Yahoo and Google, Microsoft, companies that have grown up around the Internet space should be consulted, as should the public interest community. There are a number of public interest organizations that represent the interests of Internet users, and their opinions count, and they should be drawn upon as well.
If people who provide the networks, they've been concerned about this very issue and talking about their ability to innovate, they're talking about the future of their industry. Do you see it that way as far as the concerns that they've expressed about these potential new rules and what it might do for their businesses? Is there legitimacy to that?
There is a high degree of legitimacy to the concern that if we do not maintain an open Internet, innovation is put at risk. The next Google that is in someone's garage today probably has to give its content away for some period of time until it acquires a customer base. When that customer base grows to sufficient size, perhaps it's possible to start charging something for the content and revenues can be realized. Or perhaps advertising revenues can then be attached to that content, even if it's given away for free, and that company can realize income. But for the startup, that cannot happen. And if the startup doesn't get access to customers all across the country, If, for example, a two-lane internet were put in place across the last mile, managed by the broadband provider, with the broadband provider offering in the fast lane the content that it originates and the content of others that pay for fast lane access, with the startups and others relegated to a slower, narrower lane, that startup would never have a chance to launch. People simply will not access, as a routine matter, the slower services. If they don't load on the screen very quickly, people are going to opt for those faster services. And that is how innovation is put at risk if we don't maintain the openness of the internet. So it is critically important, if the internet is to remain the foundation that it is today, for innovation and economic growth, unparalleled in that respect in our nation's history.
Were you surprised that the vote from the commission was a 5-0 vote, even though the Republicans on it expressed concerns?
I was not, and the reason I was not surprised is because I detected in the oversight hearing that our subcommittee conducted of the FCC a broad willingness to work together and an interest in partnering across the aisle with 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans on every issue that we addressed. There was a reflection of a commonality of understanding of reaching bipartisan consensus to the greatest possible extent. Now, that's a break from the recent past history of the Commission, and I think it's a very encouraging sign that on this subject, which is quite controversial, highly important, that the vote was 5-0, although individual members did express slightly different viewpoints with regard to some aspects of the net neutrality consideration.
Your ranking member on your subcommittee, Cliff Stearns, talked about legislation that possibly would attempt to stop this effort. On the Senate, there's potential legislation from both Senators Hutchinson and McCain on this. Are you worried about legislatively some type of effort to stop this process?
Well, we have 535 members in the House and Senate collectively, and any member can advance legislation on any subject he chooses. I do not anticipate legislation being considered favorably in the House that would in any way impede the Commission's actions in this regard. I think the Commission is on the right track. I think that's a consensus that certainly is shared among Democrats in the Congress, and I know Republicans who also believe that given the forward-looking way in which this rulemaking has been positioned, that the Commission is on the right track. I think it's noteworthy that just within the last 2 days, a statement was released, co-signed by Eric Schmidt, the Chief Executive Officer of Google, and Lowell McAdam, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Verizon Wireless, both endorsing the Commission's process and commending the Commission for moving forward as it is. These parties have been the protagonists, each on an opposing side, on the net neutrality debate going back now for about 5 years. And for those 2 major companies representing the broadband community and also the content originator community to come to common agreement that the Commission is moving in the right direction, commending the rulemaking, expressing, to be certain, some differences about key aspects of the network neutrality debate, but basically commending the process, I think speaks volumes about the thoughtfulness with which this process has been put forward at the Commission.
Looking ahead to wherever the process goes and say these new rules are put into play, are there legal concerns then?
Well, there may be. I can imagine that some party that is not happy with the outcome of the rule once it's put into effect might decide to litigate and challenge the authority of the Commission to adopt the rule. The Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, that has jurisdiction over actions by federal agencies here, including the FCC, has a history of finding that the FCC lacked statutory authority for a number of steps that the Commission has taken historically. And it would not be at all surprising to see that court determine that there's a lack of statutory authority for steps the Commission is taking in this respect. It is groundbreaking. Chairman Michael Powell, when he chaired the FCC, adopted 4 principles of network neutrality, but they were policy statements. They were never reduced to a rulemaking. Some people speculated at that point that there was some doubt on the part of the Commission staff that legal authority existed to reduce those principles to a formal rule. Now that is being done and new principles are being added. And so it is entirely possible that unless there truly is broad agreement at the end of this process, about the content of the rule, that there might be some legal challenge, and the result of that as of today is unknowable. In the event that a rule is adopted, and it has fairly broad-based support, and it acknowledges the needs of content originators as well as the broadband providers for network management and their own range of managed services, then I would anticipate that if the Circuit Court for D.C. declares the Commission without statutory authority to adopt such a rule, that there would be a response in the Congress. And at that point, I would certainly encourage an effort to move to passing a bill that would confer sufficient authority on the Commission to take the steps that it's taken.
As you see the next days on this issue going forward, what should we be looking for as far as the process is concerned? Whether things are going well or there are concerns. What are some clues for people watching from home?
Well, first of all, there's a long comment period. I can't recall the exact time frame that was set in today's order, but it is more than a normally long comment period, which I think is appropriate given the importance and the controversies that inevitably will attend this subject matter, and the difficulty of drawing the line, as I indicated, between where you have one infrastructure carrying both the proprietary managed services of the broadband provider and the public internet side that carries the content originated by others. Given the difficulty of that, I think a long comment period is necessary. So I think you can anticipate a broad range of telecommunications companies, internet-centric companies, content originators, and the public interest community all weighing in with commentary. Members of Congress will undoubtedly be contacting the Commission and sending letters offering their views of the subject matter as well. At the end of this process, my prediction is that the Commission will find a path that enjoys very broad support and will achieve our goals of maintaining an open internet.
Congressman Rick Boucher, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Pedro.
Up next, an interview with Ranking Member Republican Cliff Stearns of Florida.
Representative Cliff Stearns, tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the FCC's decision today regarding net neutrality rules.
Well, I've written a letter to the chairman of the FCC and also to all the commissioners indicating that I'm not sure that there's a need for a rule as proposed by the chairman and by the FCC because there has been no market analysis to determine, first of all, is the applications that are coming through the broadband being discriminated against? He says he thinks that's true, but I don't think it's true. And in fact, if you pick up your wireless phone, you've had no trouble. I'm sure many people in this country, Americans, have had no trouble. So why would we want the chilling effect of net regulation, he calls it net neutrality, I call it net regulation, put in place for a group of people that are sending applications over the internet? And when you realize that this is going to apply to the broadband providers and not to the people who are sending the applications over the internet, you really have discrimination right in the bill. He doesn't define discrimination in the bill, but he hasn't even been fair in talking about if the rule is going to apply to one sector of the economy, why doesn't it apply to everybody? The application people as well as the broadband providers. So I've written a letter to the chairman and indicated that I think whatever he does, he should test first and do no harm.
And why do you think it doesn't apply equally?
Well, for example, some of the people that are champions of this net regulation, or as the chairman says, net neutrality, is Google, eBay, Craigslist, and other consumer groups. They want to be able to put anything and everything on the broadband. And in fact, a lot of groups that are peer-to-peer, which is downloading music, downloading DVDs, downloading all kinds of information. Obviously, you're going to need some kind of management control if one group is hogging the internet. And if you let them hog it, that is not good. But they're saying, let them hog it. Well, right now, the broadband can't handle all the peer-to-peer, can't handle all these different people. And I think what he really should do is analyze to see if there's a need for this, then put in place something that is incremental and moves towards a solution. But first of all, he's got to show it's a problem and not propose a solution without understanding what the problem is.
So early in the process, do you think there is a solution that can make all sides happy?
Well, I think sometimes negotiations are helpful, and there is perhaps some consensus, but I think the Commission must apply whatever they apply with this net neutrality, I call it net regulation, must apply to the people who are providing the applications as well as the people who are offering the broadband. Why isn't it applicable to everybody?
Tell us a little bit then. All 5 of the commissioners decided to go ahead with this notice of proposed rulemaking, even though there were some reservations from the Republican members. Did you have a chance to talk with them about their reservations at all?
Well, we've had a hearing, and we had all 5 commissioners up, so we talked to them, we had their opinion. I think almost all the commissioners, including the chairman, has been in my office. I'm the ranking Republican, the lead Republican on telecommunications, technology, and internet, so I've had the opportunity to talk to them. I respect their opinion. You know, a lot of people think this almost impinges upon the fairness doctrine. That is, broadband operates a broadband, and some people want to get on it and hog it for their own personal use. There's a possibility that fairness is involved here. But I think the Republican commissioners are saying, okay, the first step is the notice, and that's what this is. And we're going to get comments over a period of time. Once these comments come in, that's when the rubber's going to meet the road, and we're going to see, in fact, what kind of rule that the chairman's going to offer here, and then I think that would be the real debate. Right now, there's a period where people can offer their suggestions, and I'm hoping that the chairman will look at the letter that I sent together with 22 other Republicans who serve in the Energy and Commerce Committee, who are knowledgeable in this, asking the chairman, say, gee whiz, why don't you do a study first to see if it's needed?
Talk a little bit about what the worst case scenario. Should it go forward after the comment period, the rules as they are laid out pass? What does it mean for a network provider?
Well, it's a good question is, what is the worst case scenario? I'm not sure what it would be, but I would say to you that if you're a broadband provider and you're going to spend billions of dollars to put in fiber optics, it'll have a chilling effect on you, and you might slow down your investment, particularly in light of this economy, the high unemployment, the recession. We don't need this to be put on the table at this point, because I think it would stop investment. The other thing that would happen is that it would say, based upon the legal language, which is now there is no definition of discrimination, it'd probably end up in the courts, which would be another problem, because litigation slows things down, and we're trying to get 4th generation wireless on the phone. We're trying to get streaming of television in high definition across the 4th generation wireless. So we have all kinds of video on demand requirements. But what would this do in the courts, as well as slow down the investment? I'm not sure. Another long-term effect is that you're going to take the providers and the application people are going to be fighting against each other. And if it turns out that the consumer groups win, then I think there's going to be a lack of innovation that's required. Because right now the innovation's there. We can pick up our wireless and we don't have any problem. And in fact, there's been court cases which showed that providers are basically doing a good job, and that people can get their applications on the internet without a problem.
You talked about the letter you wrote. Is there any legislative recourse should these rules go into effect?
That's a good question. I think to get the debate in a more concise and focused manner, I'm going to drop a bill which basically reiterates the letter that I sent to the chairman, which says basically, here's what should be done. Congress is recommending that we have a market analysis to see if there's a problem, and all the different, shall we say, requirements and milestones in that analysis, how it should be done would be part of my bill. And I think I'll get a lot of co-sponsors on. And of course, on the Senate side, Kay Bailey Hutchison, the senator from Texas, has indicated she's going to put an amendment to an appropriations bill, which would, in effect, not allow the FCC chairman to spend any money for this until he demonstrates that there's a need for this rule.
Do you think that this is a partisan issue in the sense that you would get support from both sides of the House, particularly from your colleagues?
Well, I think if you look at the record, there's about 72 Democrats have signed a letter, probably in the last week and a half, who reiterated my position, which basically be very careful, move slowly on net neutrality. It's a question of whether it's needed. So if you say most of the Republicans are against this so-called net neutrality, and you take some of those Democrats, then obviously you got a majority to put a stop to this. So I think the chairman's going to have to move very slowly here if he expects to get a consensus.
Talk a little bit about, I guess, as a first main effort from this FCC. Were you surprised that this will be the first big issue they tackled?
I was. In fact, because the chairman testified before our telecommunication subcommittee, and I touched upon net neutrality using his words and talking about the issue. He never brought it up. He didn't talk about it in his opening statement. When we had questions for him over a period of an hour and a half, he didn't mention anything. So we're all quite surprised when he suddenly, within 3 or 4 days, gave a major speech on it and made this his first priority. So in a sense, he was saying, Congress, be darned, I'm just going to run ahead and do this anyway, when I think, at the very least, since he just got appointed, he would have said, this is what I'm thinking of doing. What's your comments? But he didn't do that, and so we were quite surprised. In fact, I pressed it out that my concern was so strong that I criticized him. And to his credit, he called back and he apologized for not making it more transparent in the beginning. And I accepted his apology.
Could this been resolved outside of the FCC? Could the market have decided that they can impose their own kind of limits on network management?
I think so. In the United States, we like to see that the free market can decide these things, particularly when you have so much innovation in the video demand, which is going to be a major source of information that's going to be broadcast over the broadband. So I think at the very least he should have said, okay, this is what we're going to do. Bring in the groups, try and iron out a way to do this. We've done this several times on the Telecommunications Subcommittee. The most recently, there's been complaint about advertising. Their voices over on the advertising are too loud, and we got a consensus in the industry. So we didn't have to pass legislation that says, you know, government mandates what decibels are going to be on advertisers. So I think this can be done through the private sector, and I'm hoping that in the end, the comments that will come back to him will show that the best thing to do is to let the private sector do it.
So one more question. Talk a little bit about your course of action between now and the eventual vote on this.
Well, we expect to drop me to have a bill probably in the next week and a half to drop it and try and seek co-sponsors as well as Democrats. If we get a bipartisan bill, I think that would send a message. I'll work with the Senate, a senator from Texas, and also to try and be sure that industry comments on the proposed rule, and if necessary, try and have another hearing. The chairman is Rick Boucher from Virginia. Maybe perhaps we could have a hearing and bring this in and get some more thoughts on it.
In a general sense, how do those in the subcommittee view this issue?
Well, I think it's broken down pretty much on a Republicans have pretty much questioned the need for net regulation or net neutrality, and I think there's a few Democrats who are also concerned. And I think if it was brought to daylight and we had a chance to discuss it, we might let private industry try to solve this problem in a short amount of time before the government steps in.
Representative Cliff Stearns of Florida, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
The Commission will accept public comment on the proposals until mid-January. They've also launched a website at openinternet.gov to inform the public about FCC activities on the issue. Don't forget that this program and others can be found on our Communicators website at cspan.org.